An evil owner sold his German Shepherd to a disabled boy, thinking he was getting rid of a broken dog. But what happened next shocked the whole world. The boy couldn't walk, but somehow the dog seemed to understand him, moving before he spoke, guarding him like a soldier who remembered a war no one else could see. Then strange things started happening. Cars idling at night, a scar the dog wouldn't let anyone touch, and a collar hiding something that was never meant to be found. What secret was buried inside that dog? Why was his former owner suddenly desperate to take him back? As danger closes in, one family must uncover the truth behind a bond that defies logic, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Because sometimes, the most loyal heart hides the deadliest secret. What did this dog do that made the entire world stop and watch? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift yard sale, turning Brooks Security Kennel's gravel driveway into a shimmering mirage of heat waves and dust. Metal dog cages lined up in rows caught the sunlight like prison bars, while piles of worn training equipment lay scattered across folding tables. The air felt thick and heavy, carrying the mingled scents of leather leashes, metal, and the distinct musk of the kennels beyond. 11-year-old Hollis Crane gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles white with determination as his father Rowan carefully navigated the uneven ground. The boy's light brown hair stuck to his forehead in the heat, but his bright eyes darted eagerly from item to item, taking everything in. "Careful there," Tamsin Ward murmured, walking alongside them. Her auburn braid swung gently as she kept a watchful eye on her young patient. As Hollis's rehabilitation therapist, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of fatigue in his face, but today his expression showed nothing but keen interest. They'd nearly reached the end of the first row when Hollis suddenly went still. "Dad," he whispered. "Look." In the shadow of the kennel building lay a large German Shepherd, tethered to a sturdy post. Unlike the other dogs that barked and paced in their runs, this one lay perfectly still, watching the yard sale visitors with intelligent amber eyes. A harsh scar traced across his ribs, visible even through his black and tan coat. "That's Duke," came a sharp voice behind them. Liam Brooks approached, his mirrored aviator sunglasses reflecting the punishing sunlight. His tactical gear seemed excessive for a yard sale, but everything about the man spoke of carefully maintained control. "He's not for sale." But something extraordinary was already happening. The German Shepherd had risen to his feet, his attention locked entirely on Hollis. There was no aggression in his posture, no tension, just an intensity of focus that made the air seem to crackle between boy and dog. "Duke!" Brooks snapped. "Down!" The command rang out like a gunshot, but Duke didn't flinch. Instead, to everyone's astonishment, he padded forward to the full length of his lead and then sat perfectly at attention beside Hollis's wheelchair, as if he'd been trained to do exactly that his entire life. Hollis reached out a trembling hand, his movements made uncertain by his cerebral palsy. Duke responded by gently laying his head in the boy's lap, as natural as breathing. A small gasp escaped Tamsin's lips at the tenderness of the gesture. That's impossible," Brooks muttered, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Duke doesn't respond to anyone but me. He's not some therapy dog. He's a trained protection animal." Rowan Crane stepped forward, his worn flannel shirt dark with sweat patches, but his blue eyes bright with something that looked like hope. "How much?" "He's not for sale," Brooks repeated more firmly, reaching for Duke's lead. But the dog didn't move, staying steadfastly by Hollis's side. The boy's hand had found its way to Duke's ear, scratching gently, and the huge shepherd leaned into the touch like a house pet. "Everything has a price," Rowan insisted. Tamsin noticed the slight tremor in his voice, the same one he got when discussing Hollis's medical bills. "Name it." Brooks removed his sunglasses, revealing calculating eyes that darted between Duke and Hollis. Something passed across his face: surprise, anger, and then a careful mask of consideration. $2,000, he said finally, naming a figure he clearly thought would end the conversation. Rowan's shoulders tensed. Tamsin knew that amount would strain his mechanic's salary to the breaking point, especially with all the medical expenses. But before he could respond, Hollis spoke up, his voice clear despite his usual difficulty with speech. "He needs us, Dad," Hollis said simply, still stroking Duke's fur. "And we need him." The words hung in the hot afternoon air. Duke hadn't moved a muscle, his solid presence somehow making Hollis's wheelchair look less like a medical device and more like a throne. Tamsin stepped closer to Rowan, keeping her voice low. "There's something not right here," she murmured, her instincts as a healthcare provider on high alert. "The way that scar looks on Duke's side, and Brooks's reaction to this." Rowan nodded slightly, but his expression had already set into the determined look Tamsin recognized, the one he wore when fighting insurance companies or pushing for additional therapy sessions for his son. He pulled out his phone, checked his banking app, and then squared his shoulders. $2,000, he said firmly. "We'll take him." Brooks's expression flickered again. Surprise, calculation, and something darker that vanished so quickly Tamsin wasn't sure she'd seen it at all. He produced a bill of sale from his tactical vest pocket with suspicious readiness, as if he'd been prepared for this possibility all along. As Rowan worked out the payment details, Tamsin knelt beside Hollis's wheelchair. The boy's face was glowing with a joy she hadn't seen in all their therapy sessions combined. Duke remained pressed against the wheelchair, his body positioned almost protectively between Hollis and Brooks. "You sure about this, buddy?" she asked softly, though she already knew the answer. Hollis nodded, his eyes never leaving Duke. "He's been waiting for me," he said with the simple certainty of childhood. "I can tell." The paperwork was signed, the payment transferred, and Brooks disappeared into the kennel building to fetch Duke's records and remaining equipment. When he returned, he handed over a folder and a worn leather leash with movements that seemed just a fraction too controlled. "He's highly trained," Brooks said, his professional mask back in place, "but he can be stubborn. If you have any problems..." He held out a business card that Rowan took automatically. As they prepared to leave, Duke fell into perfect heel position beside Hollis's wheelchair without a single command being given. The massive dog matched his pace exactly to the wheelchair's speed, as if he'd been doing it his whole life. They made their way down the gravel driveway, the afternoon sun casting their shadows long across the ground, Rowan pushing the wheelchair, Tamsin walking beside them, and Duke moving like a proud guardian beside his new charge. Tamsin glanced back once and caught Brooks standing absolutely still, watching them leave with an unreadable expression on his face. Something about his stance made the hair on the back of her neck rise. But then Hollis laughed, a pure, delighted sound, as Duke gently nuzzled his hand, and the moment was broken. The boy who had always seemed oldest in spirit among them suddenly looked exactly his 11 years, face bright with simple joy as he leaned down to whisper something in his new dog's ear. The German shepherd's ears twitched forward attentively, his amber eyes soft as he listened to his new friend, while behind them, the security kennels and their mysteries fell away in the shimmering afternoon heat. The Crane household hummed with a new kind of life in the days following Duke's arrival. The German shepherd's nails clicked steadily across the hardwood floors, as he shadowed Hollis's every movement, their connection deepening with each passing hour. Where before the house had felt weighted with quiet determination, now it rang with Hollis's frequent laughter. "Look at this, Miss Ward," Hollis called out during his therapy session 3 days after bringing Duke home. The boy was working through his daily stretching routine in the living room, Duke stationed attentively beside the exercise mat. Without any command, the shepherd slipped his broad shoulder under Hollis's arm, providing perfect balance support as the boy transitioned from one position to another. Tamsin watched in amazement from where she knelt nearby. "That's incredible," she said, noting how Duke adjusted his stance with microscopic precision to match Hollis's needs. "It's like he's had years of service dog training." "He just knows," Hollis said simply, his face glowing with pride as he scratched behind Duke's ears. The big dog's eyes half closed in contentment, though Tamsin noticed his ears remained perked and alert, constantly monitoring their surroundings. Even Rowan seemed lighter, watching his son navigate daily tasks with newfound confidence. Duke anticipated Hollis's needs with uncanny accuracy, retrieving dropped items before being asked, positioning himself for support during transfers, even sensing when Hollis's muscles were starting to fatigue during therapy, and gently nudging him to take breaks. "I've never seen anything like it," Rowan admitted to Tamsin as they watched Hollis and Duke in the backyard one afternoon. "It's like they've known each other forever." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I know you had concerns about Brooks's place, but look at them. How could this not be right?" Tamsin nodded, wanting to share his optimism. The transformation in Hollis was remarkable, his confidence growing, his movements more assured with Duke's steady presence. But she couldn't shake the memory of Brooks's calculated gaze, the too-ready paperwork, the way he'd watched them leave. That night, well past midnight, Tamsin was finishing paperwork at her small kitchen table when her phone buzzed with a text from Rowan. "Duke just woke us up growling. Never heard him make a sound before. Everything's locked up, but keep your eyes open." Tamsin's hands tightened around her phone. She moved to her window, scanning the quiet street. Nothing seemed out of place in the silver moonlight, but she found herself double-checking her locks anyway. The next morning she arrived early for Hollis's therapy session. Rowan met her at the door, dark circles under his eyes. "Probably nothing," he said quietly as they watched Hollis and Duke eat breakfast together. But around 2 a.m. there were headlights in the trees behind the house. Just for a moment, then gone. Duke knew before any of us. He was already standing guard in Hollis's room when I got there. Tamsin frowned. Has he been aggressive at all? Showing any concerning behaviors? Rowan shook his head. Just the opposite. He's gentle as a lamb with Hollis. But last night, he trailed off, glancing at his son. It was like having a trained guard dog. He positioned himself between Hollis's bed and the window, and he wouldn't move until dawn. During their therapy session, while Hollis was focused on his exercises, Tamsin took the opportunity to examine Duke more closely. The shepherd sat patiently as she ran her hands over his powerful shoulders and checked his vaccination tags. Everything seemed normal until her fingers found an unusual ridge under his leather collar. Carefully, she lifted the collar's edge. There, concealed beneath the leather, was a sleek metal panel sealed with tiny screws. The hardware looked military-grade, nothing like the simple tracking chips used in ordinary pets. "Rowan," she called softly, "can you come look at this?" He crouched beside her, frowning as she showed him the hidden panel. "What is that?" "I don't know," Tamsin admitted, her throat tight. "But it's not standard equipment. This is serious technology, the kind used in—" She hesitated, glancing at Hollis. "In professional security operations." Duke turned his head to look at them, his amber eyes somehow older and wiser than any dog's should be. In that moment, Tamsin felt the first real tendril of fear take root in her chest. The scar on Duke's ribs, the military-grade collar, Brooks's too careful reactions, none of it added up to a simple story of an abused dog finding a new home. "We need to be careful," she whispered to Rowan. "I don't think we know the whole truth about where Duke came from, and I'm not sure Brooks is done with him." "What do you want me to do?" Rowan asked, his voice equally low. "Look at them together. I can't take Duke away from Hollis now." Tamsin watched as Hollis called Duke back to his side, the shepherd immediately returning to his self-appointed post as guardian and friend. The boy's small hand disappeared into Duke's thick fur, and the dog's entire body relaxed into the touch while his eyes remained vigilant. "No," she agreed finally. "We can't separate them, but we need to find out what that collar really is, and why Brooks let Duke go so easily. And until we do..." She met Rowan's worried gaze. "We need to watch them both very carefully." The therapy session continued, filled with Hollis's determined counting and Duke's unwavering support. But now every shadow that crossed the windows drew Tamsin's attention, and each unusual sound made her wonder what secrets Duke's collar might hold, and what price those secrets might ultimately demand. Tamsin's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as she turned onto the gravel drive leading to Brooks' kennels. The late morning sun did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in her stomach. Steel mesh kennels lined the property, their occupants falling silent as she parked, a trained response that made her skin crawl. Liam Brooks emerged from the office building, mirrored aviators reflecting her approach. His tactical vest seemed excessive for kennel management, but Tamsin suspected that was exactly the point. Everything about Brooks was calculated for effect. "Miss Ward," he called out, lips curving in what might have passed for a smile if it reached his eyes. "What brings a physical therapist to my humble establishment?" Tamsin squared her shoulders. "We need to talk about Duke." "Ah." Brooks gestured toward the office. "Please, step into my office." The space was meticulously organized, with certificates covering one wall and surveillance monitors on another. Brooks settled behind his desk, finally removing his sunglasses to reveal cold eyes. "Duke's collar," Tamsin said, not waiting for pleasantries. "It's got military-grade tracking equipment. That's not standard for a family pet." Brooks leaned back, threading his fingers together. "Once sold, property falls outside my jurisdiction. I believe that's basic contract law." "A dog isn't property," Tamsin countered, her voice sharp. "And Duke's behavior suggests extensive security training, not just basic obedience." "Duke," Brooks said slowly, "is what we call a problem dog, strong-willed, prone to independent thinking, hence the tracking collar, for everyone's safety, you understand." Something in his tone made Tamsin's pulse quicken. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Merely that some dogs require a shorter leash than others." Brooks stood, walking to the window. Outside, a trainer was putting a young shepherd through harsh paces. "Duke's previous training was quite extensive, expensive too. It would be a shame if his new owners found themselves overwhelmed." "Is that a threat?" Brooks turned, his smile thin and sharp. "A professional observation. Nothing more." He moved to open the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run." Tamsin stayed rooted in place. "The collar's technology. It's military or police grade. Why would a family pet need that level of monitoring?" "Miss Ward," Brooks's voice hardened. "You seem very invested in a dog that isn't yours. I'd hate to see that professional concern of yours lead to complications." The threat hung in the air between them. Tamsin held his gaze for a long moment before turning to leave. As she walked to her car, she felt Brooks's eyes following her every step. The drive home seemed longer than usual, her mind racing with possibilities. None of them good. She pulled into the Cranes' driveway just as Rowan was finishing some yard work. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About Duke." Inside, they sat at the kitchen table while Hollis did his homework in the living room, Duke a steady presence at his side. Tamsin kept her voice low as she recounted her conversation with Brooks. "There's something wrong here, Rowan. That collar, Brooks's warnings. Duke isn't just some rescue dog. Whatever he was trained for, it was serious enough that Brooks is still watching him." Rowan ran a hand through his hair, glancing at his son. Hollis was smiling as he worked, occasionally reaching down to scratch Duke's ears. The shepherd's eyes remained alert, scanning the room even as he leaned into the boy's touch. "Look at them," Rowan said softly. "I haven't seen Hollis this happy in years. Duke helps him feel safe, capable. I can't take that away from him." "Rowan, please. Brooks practically threatened me today. Whatever's going on." "Then we'll deal with it," Rowan cut in. "We'll be careful, watch for trouble. But I won't give up the first. Good thing that's happened to my son in too long." Tamsin wanted to argue further, but the determination in Rowan's eyes stopped her. She understood. The way Hollis had blossomed with Duke around, gaining confidence and independence. Breaking that bond would crush him. "At least let me look into Brooks," she said finally. "Something about his operation isn't right." Rowan nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Please." That night Tamsin couldn't sleep. She paced her small apartment, jumping at every passing car. Around midnight, her phone lit up with a text from Rowan. "It's happening again. Car outside. Duke's on alert." In the Crane household, Duke stood rigid in Hollis's doorway, his low growl vibrating through the darkness. Outside, an engine idled, headlights cutting through the trees behind the house. Rowan crouched beside his son's bed, one hand on Hollis's shoulder, the other gripping his phone. Hollis stirred. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing, buddy. Duke's just being extra protective tonight." The shepherd's growl deepened as footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Duke's ears flattened, his body coiled with tension as he positioned himself more firmly between the door and Hollis's bed. The message was clear. Nothing would get past him. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the car engine rumbled to life and faded into the distance. Duke maintained his guard position until dawn began to paint the sky pink. Rowan texted Tamsin, "They're gone. Duke never moved from his post. This feels personal now." Tamsin stared at the message, her earlier conversation with Brooks echoing in her mind. They had inherited more than a pet when they took Duke home. They had stepped into something darker, something that Brooks clearly wanted to keep hidden. As she watched the sunrise, Tamsin made a decision. She would dig deeper into Brooks' security kennels, no matter the risk. Because whatever secret Duke carried, it was worth killing to protect. And the Cranes were now squarely in the crosshairs. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Tamsin pulled into the parking lot of the Pine Creek Diner. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone one last time before heading inside. The message from Quentin Hale confirmed their meeting. "Back booth, already here. Ordered coffee for 2. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The diner was nearly empty, save for a few early morning regulars hunched over their breakfast plates. In the back booth, just as promised, sat Quentin Hale. He looked exactly as she remembered from his byline photo, disheveled in a way that suggested too many late nights chasing stories rather than a lack of care. "Miss Ward," he said, rising slightly as she approached. "Glad you reached out." Tamsin slid into the booth, grateful for the steaming cup of coffee waiting for her. "Thank you for meeting me so early. And please, it's Tamsin." Quentin nodded, pulling out a worn notebook. "Your message mentioned Brooks Security Kennels. I've had my eye on them for a while, but nothing concrete enough to print." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What made you decide to dig deeper?" Tamsin spent the next 15 minutes detailing everything. Duke's strange behavior, the military-grade collar, Brooks's thinly veiled threats, and the nighttime surveillance of the Crane house. With each detail, Quentin's expression grew more serious. "This fits a pattern," he said finally, flipping through his notes. "Brooks Security isn't just training dogs for private security. They're running what I call manufactured incidents, staged attacks and break-ins that justify their inflated contracts." He pulled out several photographs, spreading them across the table. They showed various properties, businesses, homes, construction sites, all with Brooks security signs prominently displayed. "See these clients? Every single one hired Brooks after experiencing a security incident. Break-ins, vandalism, mysterious trespassers, and in every case, guess who responded to the initial police reports?" "Deputy Sutter," Tamsin breathed, the pieces clicking into place. "Exactly." Quentin's eyes gleamed with the intensity of someone who'd finally found a willing listener. "Sutter handles the reports, recommends Brooks Security as the solution, and suddenly the problems stop. Meanwhile, Brooks's contracts are 3 times the industry standard, and Sutter's been building quite a nice nest egg on a deputy's salary." Tamsin felt sick. They're running a protection racket, with trained attack dogs as the muscle. Quentin pulled out more documents, bank statements, property records, police reports. Brooks was a military K-9 handler before being discharged for excessive force. He knows how to train dogs for maximum intimidation. But here's where it gets interesting. Several of his dogs have specialized training that goes way beyond security work. "Like Duke," Tamsin said softly. "I think Duke might be more than just another security dog. The timing of Brooks practically giving him away, that high-tech collar, something bigger is at stake." Quentin hesitated. There's been chatter about Brooks branching into what he calls repossession enforcement, using dogs to help collect debts, clear out properties, whatever his clients need done quietly. "That's illegal," Tamsin protested. "So is half of what Brooks does. But with Sutter managing the police reports and county contracts, who's going to stop them?" Quentin's expression hardened. "I've been trying to expose this for months, but everyone's too scared to go on record. Brooks has dirt on half the county officials, and Sutter makes sure any complaints disappear." Tamsin stared into her coffee, now gone cold. "So what do we do?" "We need proof. Something concrete that ties Brooks and Sutter together, shows the pattern of staged incidents." Quentin lowered his voice further. "That collar you mentioned. Military and police K-9 units sometimes use them to record training sessions and deployments. If Duke's collar has that capability, it could have evidence of what Brooks was really using him for," Tamsin finished. "Exactly. But accessing that data would be dangerous. Brooks and Sutter have a lot to lose if this gets out." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more customers. Tamsin watched as 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot. Not unusual for this time of morning, but it sent her pulse racing nonetheless. "We should wrap this up," Quentin said, quickly gathering his materials. "I'll keep digging, see what else I can find about Brooks's operations. Meanwhile, tell the Cranes to be careful. These people play rough when they're backed into a corner." As they prepared to leave, Quentin handed her a small card with a number written on it. "This is my secure line. If anything happens, anything at all, call immediately. And Tamsin?" His expression was grave. "Watch your back. Once you start pulling at threads like these, the whole tapestry can come apart fast." They left separately, Tamsin waiting several minutes before heading to her car. As she drove to her first therapy appointment of the day, her mind raced with implications. Duke wasn't just a trained attack dog. He was potential evidence of a criminal enterprise that reached into the heart of local law enforcement. The safe thing would be to walk away, to tell the Cranes to return Duke and forget everything she'd learned. But she thought of Hollis's smile, of Duke's unwavering protection, of Brooks's smug certainty that no one would challenge his power. Her phone buzzed with a text from Quentin. "Got another lead. Meeting a source tonight. We'll update tomorrow." Tamsin took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. They weren't just fighting for Duke anymore. They were fighting against a system of corruption that had gone unchecked for too long. And somewhere in that high-tech collar around Duke's neck might be the key to bringing it all down. As she pulled into her client's driveway, she spotted a police cruiser driving slowly past. Deputy Sutter was behind the wheel, his gaze fixing on her for a moment before he continued on. The message was clear. They were watching, and they knew she was asking questions. Tamsin forced herself to remain calm as she gathered her therapy supplies. She had chosen this fight by reaching out to Quentin, and now there was no going back. Whatever evidence Duke carried, whatever secrets Brooks was protecting, the truth needed to come out before someone got hurt. The weight of her discovery pressed heavy on her shoulders as she walked to her client's door. Brooks and Sutter's operation went beyond simple cruelty to animals. It was a calculated system of intimidation and profit, protected by the very people meant to prevent such abuse. And somehow, Duke had become the weak point in their carefully constructed scheme. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows as Tamsin set up for Hollis's therapy session. Duke lay alert beside Hollis's wheelchair, his amber eyes following every movement. The German Shepherd's presence had already made a remarkable difference in their sessions. Hollis seemed more confident, more willing to push through difficult exercises. "Let's try something different today," Tamsin suggested, watching Duke's attentive posture. "Duke seems to have some special training. Would you mind if we test it out?" Hollis's face lit up. "Can we?" Rowan, who had taken the afternoon off work to observe the session, nodded from his position on the couch. "As long as it's safe." Tamsin started with basic service dog commands. "Duke, retrieve," she said clearly, pointing to a therapy ball that had rolled across the room. Without hesitation, Duke trotted over, picked up the ball, and brought it back with gentle precision. His training was evident in every controlled movement. "Now for something more specific," Tamsin said. "Duke, brace." To everyone's amazement, Duke immediately moved to Hollis's left side, positioning himself perfectly to act as a stability support. His stance was textbook, shoulders squared, legs planted firmly. "That's advanced service dog training," Tamsin explained, her voice filled with wonder. "Most dogs need months to learn proper bracing technique." They continued testing Duke's repertoire. He demonstrated flawless responses to commands for retrieving dropped items, opening doors, and even pressing the medical alert button they had installed near Hollis's bed. Each demonstration showed a level of training far beyond standard security work. "He's like a super dog," Hollis beamed, reaching down to scratch Duke's ears. But something had changed in Duke's demeanor. The German Shepherd had suddenly become fixated on Hollis's wheelchair, nosing insistently at the left wheel. His behavior was purposeful, almost urgent. "What is it, boy?" Hollis asked, trying to see what had caught Duke's attention. Duke whined softly, pawing at the wheel's axle cap. His persistence was impossible to ignore. "Hold on," Rowan said, moving closer to examine the spot Duke was indicating. "Something's not right with this cap." Tamsin joined him, kneeling beside the wheelchair. The axle cap looked normal at first glance, but when Rowan gently twisted it, it came loose with surprising ease. It was hollow inside, and wedged within was something wrapped in what appeared to be veterinary tape. What in the world? Rowan carefully extracted the small package. His fingers trembled slightly as he unwrapped the layers of tape, revealing a tiny micro SD card. The room fell silent. Duke sat back, his duty apparently fulfilled, while 3 pairs of human eyes stared at the tiny piece of technology that had been hidden in plain sight. "This wasn't random," Tamsin said quietly. "Someone put this here deliberately." "But who? And when?" Rowan's voice carried an edge of concern. "It had to be at Brooks's place," Tamsin reasoned. "The way Duke kept checking the wheelchair that day, he knew it was there all along." Hollis reached down to pat Duke's head. "Is that why you chose us, boy?" Duke's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes holding that intelligent gleam that had drawn them to him from the start. "We need to contact Quentin," Tamsin said, pulling out her phone. "Whatever's on this card, it might be what Brooks is really after." While they waited for Quentin to arrive, they continued with modified therapy exercises. But the atmosphere had changed. Every passing car drew their attention. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats. Quentin arrived within 30 minutes, slightly out of breath and carrying a laptop bag. His eyes widened when they showed him the micro SD card. "This could be exactly what we need," he said, carefully examining the tiny card. "Military and police K-9 units often use recording devices during operations. If Duke was involved in Brooks's illegal activities." "The evidence could be right here," Tamsin finished. "I'll need to decrypt it safely," Quentin explained, securing the card in a special case. "Brooks wouldn't have let this go unless he thought it was impossible to find. The fact that Duke led us to it." He shook his head in amazement. "He wasn't just sold to us," Hollis said suddenly, his young voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "Duke was sent to us. He chose us because he knew we'd help." Tamsin watched as Duke pressed his head against Hollis's leg, the bond between them evident in every gesture. The German Shepherd had come into their lives carrying more than just the scars of his past. He carried the key to exposing the truth about Brooks's operation. "I'll keep this secure," Quentin promised, patting his laptop bag, "and I'll let you know what I find as soon as I can decrypt it safely." As he prepared to leave, Duke moved to the window, his posture alert but not alarming. They had all become attuned to the difference between his casual vigilance and his warnings of actual danger. "Be careful," Tamsin urged Quentin. "If Brooks realizes we've found this." "Don't worry," Quentin assured her with a grim smile. "I've been waiting for something like this. Brooks and his friends in the department aren't the only ones who know how to keep secrets." After Quentin left, they tried to return to normal activities, but the weight of their discovery hung in the air. Duke remained extra vigilant, moving between the window and Hollis's side like a silent guardian. "What do we do now?" Hollis asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "We continue as normal," Tamsin advised, packing up her therapy equipment. "The best way to avoid suspicion is to stick to our routine. Duke's made it clear he'll let us know if there's any danger." Rowan walked her to her car, his expression troubled. "Thank you," he said, quietly, "for everything you're doing to help us understand what's really going on." "Duke chose your family for a reason," Tamsin replied, glancing back at the house where Hollis and Duke were visible through the window. "Whatever's on that card, whatever happens next, we're all in this together now." The discovery of the micro SD card had transformed their situation. What had started as a simple adoption of a mistreated dog had become something far more significant. Duke wasn't just a pet, or even just a service dog. He was a bearer of truth, choosing his moment and his allies with remarkable precision. As Tamsin drove away, she caught sight of Duke in her rearview mirror, standing guard at the window. The German Shepherd had brought more than companionship to the Crane household. He had brought purpose, protection, and now, possibly, the means to bring justice to those who had misused him. The afternoon sun had begun its descent when Hollis wheeled himself toward the backyard shed, Duke padding faithfully beside him. The old wooden structure held his father's tools and some of Hollis's therapy equipment that wouldn't fit in the house. After the morning's discovery of the micro SD card, Hollis had wanted some quiet time to think, and the shed had always been his favorite retreat. "Just for a little while, Duke," Hollis said, patting the German Shepherd's head. "Dad's inside making dinner anyway." The shed's familiar scent of motor oil and wood greeted them as Hollis pushed open the door. Duke entered first, performing his now routine inspection of the space. Everything looked normal. The workbench with its scattered tools, the metal shelving unit holding various supplies, and the small cleared area where Hollis sometimes practiced his exercises. Hollis didn't notice the strange smell at first. But Duke did. The German Shepherd's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. He let out a low whine, pawing at Hollis's wheelchair. "What's wrong, boy?" Hollis asked, suddenly aware of something acrid in the air. His heart began to race as Duke's behavior grew more urgent. Without warning, Duke grabbed the sleeve of Hollis's jacket in his teeth, pulling him backward. That's when Hollis saw it, thin wisps of smoke curling up from behind the workbench. The explosion came with devastating force. The shed's windows shattered outward as flames erupted from multiple points. The heat hit Hollis like a physical blow, and smoke immediately filled his lungs. He tried to turn his wheelchair, but one of the wheels caught on a fallen board. Duke didn't hesitate. The German Shepherd launched himself at Hollis, knocking him sideways out of the chair just as a section of the roof collapsed where he had been. Hollis felt Duke's powerful jaws close carefully but firmly around his upper arm, dragging him toward the door. The heat was intense, and Hollis could hear the terrifying crackle of flames consuming the wooden structure. Duke pulled him steadily through the smoke and debris, ignoring the burning embers that rained down on his own body. Hollis caught glimpses of angry red flames licking up the walls, heard the groan of support beams giving way. They burst out into the fresh air just as Rowan came running from the house, his face white with terror. "Hollis!" he shouted, scooping his son up from where Duke had dragged him to safety. The German Shepherd stood guard despite the obvious pain he was in. Angry red burns marked his side where he had shielded Hollis from the flames, and patches of his fur were singed and smoking. "Dad," Hollis coughed, clinging to his father. "Duke saved me. He knew something was wrong." The shed was fully engulfed now, sending thick black smoke into the evening sky. In the chaos, they almost missed the sound of an engine revving. Duke's head whipped around, a growl rumbling in his chest despite his injuries. A pickup truck was peeling away from the far side of the property, its tires throwing up gravel. Even from a distance, they could see the partially scraped-off logo on its door, the unmistakable outline of where Brooks Security Kennels had once been painted. "There!" Rowan pointed, but the truck was already disappearing down the road. That's when they noticed Quentin's car parked on the street, its dashcam light blinking steadily. Tamsin arrived minutes after the fire department, her face tight with worry. She immediately went to work examining Duke's burns, her gentle hands probing the injured areas while the firefighters contained the blaze. "He needs treatment," she said firmly, applying a cool, wet towel to Duke's side. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still, only his occasional trembling betraying his pain. "These burns are serious, but he's lucky. It could have been much worse." Hollis hadn't left Duke's side, his hand resting on the dog's uninjured shoulder. He didn't even think about himself, the boy said, his voice shaking. He just got me out. Quentin arrived shortly after, having been called by Tamsin. He immediately checked his dashcam footage, his expression grim as he reviewed it on his laptop. "We've got him," he said, turning the screen so they could see. The footage clearly showed the pickup truck fleeing the scene. "The license plate is visible, and even with the logo scraped off, there's no doubt who owns that truck." "Liam," Tamsin said, her voice hard as steel. "He's done hiding behind threats. He's trying to kill them now." Rowan paced the scorched grass, running his hands through his hair. "We need to go to the police." "Not the local department," Quentin warned. "Remember, Deputy Sutter is involved in this. We need to take this higher, state level at least. Once I decrypt that SD card." "First, we need to get Duke treated," Tamsin interrupted, still tending to the injured dog. "These burns need proper medical attention. I know a vet who's discreet. She's helped with rescue animals before." Duke hadn't moved from his protective position near Hollis, despite his injuries. His amber eyes remained alert, scanning their surroundings even as Tamsin worked on his burns. "He's still protecting me," Hollis said softly, tears in his eyes. "Even when he's hurt." Tamsin looked up at the boy, then at Duke, seeing the unshakable bond between them. "That's who he is," she said gently. "That's who he's always been, under all that training and abuse. A protector, not a weapon." The fire department finished controlling the blaze, leaving the shed a blackened skeleton against the darkening sky. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the approaching night's chill. "You can't stay here tonight," Quentin said, closing his laptop. "Liam knows where you live, and he's shown what he's willing to do. This wasn't just a warning. This was attempted murder." Tamsin nodded, helping Duke to his feet. "You'll come to my place, all of you. It's on the other side of town, and no one knows about my connection to this yet." The German Shepherd limped slightly, but remained steadfast, his attention never wavering from his charge. Despite his injuries, there was something almost fierce in his dedication, as if the attack had only strengthened his resolve to protect his new family. As they prepared to leave, loading essential supplies into Tamsin's car, the reality of their situation settled over them like the smoke that still hung in the air. What had started as a mysterious connection between a boy and a dog had escalated into a dangerous game of life and death. Liam Brooks had shown his hand, making it clear that he would stop at nothing to silence whatever truth Duke had brought with him to the Crane family. The attack had changed everything. Fear had given way to determination, uncertainty to resolve. They were no longer just protecting a dog with a secret. They were fighting for their lives against a man who had just proven how far he would go to keep his crimes hidden. Duke's burns would heal, but the message was clear. The real fire was just beginning. The soft glow of computer screens illuminated Quentin's cramped home office as his fingers flew across the keyboard. Tamsin watched anxiously over his shoulder, while Duke lay protectively at Hollis's feet nearby. The German Shepherd's bandaged side rose and fell with steady breaths, his injuries from the fire carefully tended by Tamsin's veterinarian friend. "The encryption's military grade," Quentin muttered, lines of code reflecting in his glasses. "But whoever hid this wanted it found eventually. There's a back door built into the security protocol." Tamsin wrapped her arms around herself, the evening's chill seeping through her thin sweater. "How long?" "Almost there." Quentin's typing intensified. "Got it?" The screen flickered, then filled with a grid of video thumbnails. Each one was dated and labeled with clinical precision. Training Session 317. Contract Demonstration B. Asset Compliance Test. "These aren't training videos," Quentin said grimly, clicking the first file. "They're evidence." The footage was sharp and clear, shot from what appeared to be a hidden camera in Brooks Kennel's main training yard. Liam Brooks stood center frame, speaking to a group of handlers in tactical gear. "Remember," Liam's voice crackled through the speakers, "the client needs results. Make it look good, make it look scary, but keep it controlled. When that alarm goes off tonight, I want that warehouse to look like a war zone." One handler raised his hand. "What about the night guard?" Liam's smile was cold. "Already taken care of. He'll be conveniently absent. Just make sure the dogs leave enough damage to justify tripling the security contract." Tamsin's hand flew to her mouth. They were staging attacks. "To sell more security contracts," Quentin finished, his jaw tight. "Create the threat, then sell the solution." He clicked through more files. Each video revealed another layer of the operation. Handlers training dogs to perform mock attacks, deliberately damaging property, even coordinating with corrupt security officials to ensure no real police response would interrupt their demonstrations. Then they found the video that changed everything. The timestamp showed it was from 6 months ago. The training yard was empty, except for Liam, 2 handlers, and Duke. A small child, probably 8 or 9 years old, stood trembling against the fence. "Asset compliance test," Liam's voice announced off-camera. "Subject shows excessive hesitation during aggressive scenarios. Correction protocol initiated." "Stop," Hollis whispered, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen. They watched as Liam ordered Duke to attack the child. The German Shepherd moved forward, but something in his posture changed. Instead of attacking, he positioned himself between the child and the handlers, his hackles raised. "Asset refusing direct command." Liam's voice was cold with fury. "Implement maximum correction." What followed was brutal. The handlers beat Duke with training batons while he stood his ground, refusing to move away from the child he was protecting. Even when they shocked him with cattle prods, he wouldn't break. Tamsin noticed Duke watching the screen, his ears forward, completely alert. There was no fear in his posture, only what looked like fierce pride. "That's why he connected with Hollis," she breathed. "He wasn't broken by their training. He chose to protect instead of attack." Quentin nodded slowly. He was probably their best-trained dog, which made him the most dangerous when he turned against them. Dogs like Duke are supposed to follow orders without question. But he developed a conscience. The next video made Tamsin's blood run cold. Deputy Len Sutter stood in Liam's office, counting stacks of bills from a thick envelope. "County Commission's asking questions about the incident reports," Sutter said, tucking the money into his jacket. "I'll make sure they get lost in the system." "Proof of the corruption," Quentin said, quickly copying the files. "Sutter's been helping Brooks cover up the staged attacks, probably for years." Hollis reached down to scratch behind Duke's ears. "You were trying to tell us all along, weren't you, boy? That's why you came home with us." Duke's tail thumped against the floor, his intelligent eyes moving between the humans as they pieced together the truth. "It wasn't random at all," Tamsin said softly. "Duke was trained to recognize vulnerability, to assess threats. When he saw Hollis at that yard sale, he made a choice," Quentin finished. "The same choice he made with that child in the video, to protect instead of harm." They watched more videos, documenting years of systematic abuse and corruption. Liam's operation was extensive, staged security incidents, inflated contracts, payoffs to officials. Duke had been their star asset until he turned against them, and somehow someone had collected all this evidence and hidden it in his collar. "Look at this," Quentin pointed to a series of files. "Financial records, contracts, everything needed to bring down the whole operation. Whoever gathered this knew exactly what they were doing." "But who?" Tamsin asked. "And why hide it in Duke's collar?" "Maybe someone on the inside grew a conscience too," Quentin suggested. "Someone who knew Duke would eventually find his way to people who'd help expose the truth." Hollis was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on Duke's head. "He's not just a dog, is he? He's a hero." Duke stood up, pressing his body against Hollis's wheelchair in a gesture that seemed both protective and affectionate. Despite his injuries from the fire, his posture was strong, alert, a guardian who had finally found his true purpose. "This changes everything," Quentin said, backing up the files onto multiple drives. "With this evidence, we can take down Brooks, Sutter, the whole operation, but we have to move fast." "They already tried to kill us once," Tamsin reminded him. "When they realize we have this..." "We need to get it to the right authorities immediately," Quentin agreed. "State police, FBI, someone beyond Sutter's influence." As they discussed their next moves, Tamsin watched Duke with new understanding. His seemingly miraculous bond with Hollis wasn't miraculous at all. It was the natural expression of his true character, finally free from the corruption that had tried to twist him into something he wasn't. The German Shepherd's story was written in his scars, in the evidence hidden in his collar, and in his unwavering dedication to protecting those who needed him most. He had endured beatings, abuse, and the brutal training of Brooks Kennels, yet emerged with his fundamental nature intact, a protector, not a weapon. The videos continued to play, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. The scope of Liam's operation was staggering. Dozens of staged incidents, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent contracts, a web of corruption that stretched through local law enforcement and government offices. But they had the proof now. Every beating, every staged attack, every payoff was documented in clinical detail. The very thoroughness that Liam had demanded from his operation would now be his undoing. Duke's ears suddenly perked up, his attention shifting to the window. A car engine rumbled in the distance, then faded away. They all felt the weight of their discovery, and the danger it brought. The truth about Brooks Kennels was finally exposed, but now came the most dangerous part, making sure that truth reached the right people before Liam could silence them all. The German Shepherd stood watch as they worked, his presence a reminder of everything they were fighting for. He had chosen to protect rather than harm, to serve rather than submit. And in doing so, he had not only saved himself, but had brought to light a darkness that had poisoned their community for far too long. The videos continued to play, but they hardly needed to watch anymore. The truth was right there beside them, wearing fur and bandages, standing guard over a boy in a wheelchair, living proof that even in the darkest places, conscience and courage could prevail. Quentin's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Rowan's living room windows as they raced against time. "Triple redundancy," he muttered, creating secure cloud accounts under different aliases. "Even if they get to one backup, the others will still release automatically." He glanced at his watch. 48 hours. If we don't manually stop it by then, everything goes public. Tamsin paced behind the couch, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand it's short notice," she said firmly, "but this is a special circumstance. The client has cerebral palsy, and the dog has already demonstrated advanced service capabilities." She paused, listening. "Tomorrow morning? Perfect. We'll be there." Duke lay at Hollis's feet, his ears tracking every movement, every sound. The bandages from the fire still wrapped his side, but his alertness never wavered. When a car drove past the house, his head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "The service dog certification is crucial," Tamsin explained, settling onto the couch after ending her call. "Once Duke is officially registered, taking him would be like stealing medical equipment. Even Sutter couldn't sweep that under the rug." "Smart," Quentin nodded, still typing. "We need every layer of protection we can get. I've contacted a state investigator I trust, someone with no connections to local law enforcement. She's willing to meet us at Miller's Marina up in Lakewood County. That's nearly 2 hours away, Rowan said, wheeling Hollis closer to the group. Exactly. Well outside Sutter's jurisdiction, and too far for Brooks to have much influence. Quentin finished another upload, then turned to face them. The marina's public but quiet this time of year. Plenty of witnesses around, but not so many that we'll miss anything suspicious. Hollis reached down to scratch behind Duke's ears. When do we go? Day after tomorrow, Quentin answered. First thing in the morning. That gives us time to get Duke certified and make sure all our evidence is secure. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The timing has to be perfect. We need the certification in hand before we move, but we can't wait so long that Brooks figures out what we're planning. Tamsin knelt beside Duke, gently checking his bandages. The burns were healing well, but the memory of that night, the exploding shed, the dog's unwavering courage, still made her hands shake slightly. The evaluation's tomorrow at 9 o'clock, she said. I called in some favors with a certification specialist I used to work with. She'll fast-track the paperwork once she sees what Duke can do. And I'll have 3 separate cloud triggers set up by tonight, Quentin added. If anything happens to us, if we don't check in at specific times, everything goes public. Local news, state papers, federal authorities, the whole story. The plan was taking shape, transforming their fear into purpose. For the first time since discovering the SD card, they weren't just reacting to threats. They were taking control. What do we tell people? Rowan asked. Brooks has eyes everywhere. If we all disappear at once. You and Hollis have a medical consultation in Lakewood, Tamsin suggested. I'm driving you as your therapist. Nothing suspicious about that. And I'll already be at the marina, Quentin said, working on a story about local tourism. All perfectly normal reasons for everyone to be there. Duke's head suddenly snapped toward the window. A moment later, they heard the crunch of tires on gravel, a vehicle moving slowly past the house. Everyone froze, watching the dog's reaction. After a tense minute, Duke relaxed slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on the window. They're watching, Hollis whispered, his hand tightening in Duke's fur. Let them, Quentin said grimly. Every minute they spend watching us is a minute they're not finding what we've done with their evidence. Tamsin stood up, her decision made. I'm staying here tonight, she announced. We need to keep Hollis and Duke together, and more eyes on the house won't hurt. Rowan nodded gratefully. The attack on the shed had shaken his confidence in their safety, but having Tamsin there would help. Besides, they needed to prepare for tomorrow's certification, the first step in their plan to protect Duke legally. I'll head out the back, Quentin said, closing his laptop. Less obvious that way? Keep your phones on, but don't discuss anything sensitive. Just normal, everyday messages. As the journalist gathered his things, Tamsin noticed how Duke positioned himself, angled to watch both the window and the hallway, while staying within reach of Hollis's chair. The dog's intelligence wasn't just training. It was something deeper, an innate understanding of his role as protector. We're doing the right thing, she said softly, more to herself than the others. All of this, it's not just about exposing Brooks anymore. It's about making sure Duke stays where he belongs. Hollis wheeled closer to the German Shepherd, his movements careful but confident after weeks of having Duke at his side. They're not going to take you, he told the dog firmly. We won't let them. Duke's tail thumped once against the floor. Acknowledgement, agreement, dedication all wrapped in that simple gesture. He had chosen this family, chosen to protect rather than harm, and tomorrow they would begin ensuring that choice was protected by law. As evening settled over the house, they began preparing for the next day's evaluation. Tamsin ran Hollis and Duke through the key commands they'd need to demonstrate: retrieval, bracing, alerting to danger. The dog performed flawlessly, his responses so natural they seemed more like collaboration than compliance. Their plan wasn't perfect. A lot could go wrong between now and their meeting at the marina. But watching Duke work with Hollis, seeing the bond between them grow stronger even under threat, Tamsin felt a surge of determination. They had truth on their side, and now they had a way to use it. The evidence was secure, the certification appointment was set, and the state investigator was ready to meet them. After weeks of living in fear, of wondering when Brooks would strike next, they were finally taking action. Tomorrow would begin their fight to protect Duke and expose the corruption that had nearly destroyed him. As night fell, Duke took up his usual position by Hollis's bed, alert but peaceful. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A family defending one of their own, a dog protecting his chosen charge, and truth finally emerging from shadows. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when Rowan began loading the truck. Each bag he placed in the bed felt heavier than it should, weighted down with worry. The morning air was crisp and still, broken only by the soft whir of Hollis's wheelchair as Tamsin helped him down the ramp they'd installed last summer. Duke padded silently beside them, his amber eyes scanning the shadowy yard. The German Shepherd's alertness was both reassuring and unsettling, a reminder of why they were leaving before dawn. "Got everything?" Rowan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The neighborhood slept peacefully around them, unaware of the tension crackling through the morning quiet. Hollis nodded, clutching Duke's collar. The leather felt warm and familiar under his fingers. He'd refused to let go of it since waking, as if maintaining that physical connection could somehow guarantee their safety. "Quentin's in position," Tamsin murmured, checking her phone. "He'll follow us at a distance. Says the back roads are clear so far." They'd planned this carefully. No highways, no main routes where Liam's network of corrupt officers might be watching. Instead, they'd take the winding country roads that stretched between farms and forests. It would take longer, but it was their best chance at reaching the marina undetected. Rowan helped Hollis into the truck's passenger seat, then carefully folded the wheelchair and secured it in the bed. Duke jumped up without command, positioning himself on the floor between Hollis's feet. The dog's presence was solid and steady, a guardian angel with fur and fangs. "Remember," Tamsin said as she climbed into her own car, "we stick to the story if anyone stops us. Regular medical consultation in Lakewood, nothing more." The truck's engine rumbled to life, sounding impossibly loud in the pre-dawn stillness. Through the rearview mirror, Rowan watched Tamsin pull out first. Quentin's sedan was already waiting 2 blocks away, ready to bring up the rear of their careful convoy. They moved through the sleeping town like ghosts. Every traffic light felt like an eternity, each intersection a potential ambush point. Hollis kept one hand buried in Duke's fur, drawing comfort from the dog's unwavering presence. "You doing okay, buddy?" Rowan asked, as they finally reached the outskirts of town. The sky was beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. "Yeah," Hollis answered softly. "Duke's not worried yet. That's good, right?" Rowan managed a smile. His son's faith in the dog's instincts wasn't misplaced. Duke had already proved himself more perceptive than any of them had expected. "That's real good." The backroads welcomed them with empty lanes and long shadows. Fields of corn and soybeans stretched out on either side, interrupted by patches of dense woodland. It should have been peaceful. Instead, every curve felt like it might hide danger. An hour into their journey, they needed to stop for gas. The small station sat alone at a crossroads, its weathered sign creaking in the morning breeze. Tamsin pulled in first, giving them the all-clear signal as she began filling her tank. Rowan was reaching for his wallet when he saw it, a black pickup truck idling at the edge of the gravel lot. Its windows were tinted dark, but he could make out at least 2 shapes inside. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Duke," he whispered. The German Shepherd's ears were already forward, his muscles tense. A low rumble built in his chest, not quite a growl, but a clear warning. "Dad?" Hollis's voice quivered slightly. "It's okay," Rowan said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "We just need to get gas and move on, nice and casual." He forced himself to go through the motions normally, swiping his card, selecting the grade, starting the pump. Every second felt stretched thin, like a wire about to snap. In his peripheral vision, he saw Quentin's sedan pull up to another pump, positioning himself between their truck and the mysterious pickup. The gas seemed to flow impossibly slowly. Through the station's grimy windows, Rowan could see Tamsin inside, taking her time at the register. She was giving them coverage, he realized, making sure they weren't alone out here. Duke's rumble deepened when the pickup's engine revved once, then twice. Hollis pressed himself back against his seat, his fingers white-knuckled in the dog's fur. "Almost done," Rowan murmured, watching the numbers tick up on the pump's display. "Almost there." The pickup began to move, rolling forward with predatory slowness. Rowan's hand shook as he replaced the nozzle, fumbling with the gas cap. He could feel eyes on them, measuring, calculating. But instead of approaching, the black truck swung wide around the lot and merged onto the main road, heading back the way they'd come. For a moment, no one moved. Then Duke's muscles relaxed slightly, though his attention remained fixed on the direction the pickup had gone. "They're calling it in," Quentin said quietly as he approached their truck. "Letting Brooks know where we are. We need to move. Now." They pulled out in formation again, this time pressing a little faster along the winding roads. The marina was still 20 miles away, glimmering like a mirage on Rowan's mental map. 20 miles of vulnerability, of watching every vehicle that passed with suspicion and fear. Hollis stayed quiet, but his eyes darted constantly between the road ahead and the side mirrors. Duke maintained his protective position, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air coming through the truck's vents. Through it all, Rowan kept thinking about the pickup at the gas station. It hadn't been a coincidence. They were being hunted. The question was whether they could reach safety before the trap closed. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn mist. Fields gave way to more frequent stretches of forest. Somewhere ahead, the marina waited with its promise of help. The state investigator who could finally bring Brooks's crimes into the light, if they could make it there. In the distance, sunlight glinted off water. They were getting close now, but Rowan's knuckles remained white on the steering wheel. Every passing car made his heart jump. Every curve in the road held the potential for ambush. Duke's head snapped up suddenly, his ears swiveling to track something Rowan couldn't hear. In the rearview mirror, he saw Quentin's sedan move closer, protective and alert. The marina's entrance was visible now, a simple sign marking the turnoff ahead. They were almost there, almost safe. But the weight of watchful eyes seemed to press down on them from all sides, and Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that they were driving straight into the trap Brooks had laid. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the marina's weathered docks. Tamsin checked her watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The investigator's boat was due at sunset, less than 30 minutes away. They had positioned themselves carefully. Rowan's truck backed up near the main dock, Quentin's car angled to watch the entrance, and Hollis's wheelchair secured where he could see everything without being exposed. Duke hadn't left Hollis's side since they arrived, his amber eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The German Shepherd's ears twitched at every sound, the lap of waves against the dock posts, the creak of old wood, the distant cry of seabirds heading to roost. "Everything's ready," Quentin said quietly, patting the laptop bag containing copies of the evidence. "As soon as the investigator arrives, we'll have official witnesses and protection." Tamsin nodded, but her stomach was tied in knots. They had chosen this location carefully, public enough to discourage violence, remote enough to avoid Sutter's immediate jurisdiction. But standing here now, the empty marina felt more like a trap than a sanctuary. The sun touched the horizon, spreading orange fire across the water. A white boat appeared around the furthest dock, moving steadily toward them. Tamsin felt her heart leap, right on schedule. She could make out two figures in official clothing, exactly as arranged. "They're here," she breathed, squeezing Hollis's shoulder gently. "Just a few more minutes." The boy managed a shaky smile, one hand buried in Duke's fur. The dog's posture remained alert but calm, a good sign. If anyone was approaching with ill intent, Duke would know first. The investigators' boat was less than 50 yards away when they heard it, the distinctive growl of a police cruiser's engine, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Duke's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl building in his chest. "No," Rowan whispered. "Not now. Not when we're so close." Deputy Sutter's cruiser burst into view, skidding to a stop at an angle that blocked the marina's only exit. The passenger door flew open and Liam Brooks emerged, his face twisted with rage. Two men in tactical gear, handlers from his kennel, flanked him as he strode toward them. "That's far enough," Quentin called out, raising his phone to film. "This is all being recorded." "Recording won't help you now," Sutter drawled, emerging from the driver's side with his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered weapon. "This is a police matter. Step away from the boy." Duke's growl became a snarl as one of the handlers circled toward Hollis's wheelchair. The man's hand shot out, grabbing the chair's handle. Hollis cried out in surprise and fear. "Don't touch him!" Rowan lunged forward, but Sutter's warning shout stopped him cold. "That's my property you're harboring," Liam spat, pointing at Duke. "A dangerous animal that needs to be put down, along with any evidence he might have been carrying." The second handler produced a catch pole, a long, metal rod with a wire noose at the end. Duke's hackles rose, his teeth bared in a fierce display of protective fury. He positioned himself squarely between Hollis and the approaching threats. "The evidence is already secure," Tamsin shot back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Multiple copies, multiple locations. You can't bury this anymore, Liam." The handler with the catch pole lunged forward. Duke dodged the noose with practiced ease, never leaving Hollis exposed. The wheelchair rocked as the first handler tried to pull it away, but Duke's powerful body pressed against it, keeping it in place. The struggle sent them crashing against a stack of fuel containers near the dock's edge. The sharp smell of propane filled the air as one cylinder tipped precariously. Sparks flew from metal scraping against concrete. "Stop this!" Tamsin screamed, seeing the danger. "There's fuel everywhere!" The investigator's boat was almost at the dock now, its occupants shouting and radioing for backup. But Liam seemed beyond caring about witnesses. His face was contorted with desperation as he reached for something in his jacket. "That dog dies today," he snarled, "along with anyone stupid enough to stand in my way." Duke's answering growl was like thunder, a sound that carried all the righteous fury of an guardian angel. The handler with the catch pole swung again, but the German Shepherd was a blur of precise motion. His teeth closed on the pole itself, wrenching it away with enough force to send the man stumbling backward. The propane cylinder rocked again. Tamsin could hear the hiss of escaping gas now, mixing with the shouts and snarls of the escalating confrontation. One spark, she realized with horror. One spark was all it would take to turn this standoff into an inferno. Time seemed to slow as Liam's hand emerged from his jacket, light glinting off metal. Duke's muscles bunched, ready to launch himself at the threat. And through it all, Hollis's voice cut through the chaos with a clarity that stopped everyone in their tracks. "Duke, protect!" The command rang out across the marina just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the scene in shades of blood and gold. The final rays caught the tears on Hollis's face, the fury in Liam's eyes, and the absolute certainty in Duke's stance as chaos erupted around them. The propane cylinder gave an ominous metallic groan. In that split second before disaster, time seemed to crystallize. Tamsin saw everything with terrifying clarity, the loose valve spinning free, the orange spark from metal scraping concrete, and Deputy Sutter's fingers closing around the handles of Hollis's wheelchair. The explosion came with a deafening whoosh. A wall of heat rolled across the dock as flames erupted from the cylinder, racing along spilled fuel like hungry serpents. The force knocked everyone back, sending them stumbling and diving for cover. "Hollis!" Rowan's scream cut through the roar of the flames. In the Fonso, chaos. Deputy Sutter had yanked Hollis's wheelchair toward the edge of the dock. Whether from panic or cruel intention, his grip was too rough. The chair tipped precariously, and Hollis's eyes went wide with terror as he felt himself falling. "No!" Tamsin lunged forward, but she was too far away. Time slowed to a crawl as Hollis toppled from his chair. His leg braces, heavy metal and leather, pulled him down like anchors. The dark water swallowed him with barely a splash. Rowan charged toward the water, but the handlers tackled him against the chain-link fence that separated the dock sections. He fought like a man possessed, his fists connecting with flesh as he tried to break free. Tamsin didn't hesitate. She kicked off her shoes and dove into the murky marina water. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she forced her eyes open, searching desperately in the greenish gloom. Bubbles rose from below, marking Hollis's descent. Above, another explosion rocked the dock. The heat was intense enough to warm the water's surface. Flaming debris rained down, hissing as it struck the water. But none of that mattered. Only Hollis mattered. She spotted him about 8 feet down, struggling weakly against the weight of his braces. His movements were growing slower by the second. Tamsin's lungs burned as she kicked hard, reaching for him. A dark shape shot past her like a torpedo. Duke! The German Shepherd's powerful legs propelled him through the water with incredible speed. He reached Hollis first, clamping his jaws carefully but firmly on the boy's shirt collar. Tamsin's heart soared at the sight. She caught up to them and helped Duke turn Hollis upright. Together they began pulling him toward the surface. The braces fought them every inch of the way, but Duke's strength seemed limitless. His eyes glowed with determination even underwater. They broke the surface into a scene from hell. The entire dock was engulfed in flames. Black smoke boiled up into the twilight sky. The heat was blistering, even from the water. Hollis coughed and gasped, clinging to Duke's thick fur. The dog paddled steadily, keeping the boy's head well above water, while Tamsin worked to unbuckle the waterlogged braces. "Over here!" The investigators' boat had pulled alongside them, hands reaching down to help. Rowan finally broke free from his attackers and dove in, swimming to his son with powerful strokes. His face was bloody from the fight, but his eyes held only relief as he helped lift Hollis into the waiting boat. Duke refused to be pulled aboard until Hollis was safely settled. Only then did he allow himself to be hauled over the gunwale, immediately pressing his wet body against the boy's side. "I've got you," Hollis whispered, wrapping his arms around Duke's neck. "You saved me. You saved me again." The dog's tail thumped weakly against the deck as he licked Hollis's face. Despite his heroics, his attention never wavered from his charge. His eyes constantly scanned for threats, even as the boat backed away from the inferno. Behind them, emergency sirens wailed in the distance. The marina's office had caught fire now, and the flames reflected off the water like dancing demons. Through the smoke, they could see Liam Brooks and his men retreating to their vehicles. But Deputy Sutter stood at the edge of the dock, his face a mask of conflicting emotions as he watched them escape. "It's over," Tamsin said, helping Rowan wrap a blanket around Hollis's shivering shoulders. "They can't hide from this now." The evidence was secure, just as they'd planned. But more than that, they had dozens of witnesses to the attack. The investigators had captured everything on video. Deputy Sutter's involvement was undeniable now. Hollis leaned against Duke's solid presence, his hand buried in the dog's wet fur. The German shepherd's eyes never left his boy's face, as if memorizing every detail to make sure he was truly safe. "Good boy," Hollis whispered. "The best boy." Duke's response was a soft whine and a gentle nuzzle. In that moment, as the boat carried them to safety through the gathering darkness, the bond between them seemed to glow brighter than the flames they'd left behind. A connection forged in fear and strengthened by love, unshakable, unbreakable, and pure. Rowan gathered both his son and the dog into his arms, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Tamsin watched them, her heart full despite her chattering teeth and soaked clothes. They had risked everything, but they had won. More importantly, they had proven that courage and loyalty could triumph over cruelty and corruption. The marina continued to burn behind them, but they were beyond its reach now. Duke had done more than save Hollis's life. He had brought justice to light. His heroism would ensure that Liam Brooks and his operation would never harm another innocent soul. Bruised, shivering, and dripping with river water, Tamsin fumbled with her waterlogged phone. Her fingers trembled, partly from cold and partly from adrenaline, as she tried to type out a message to Quentin. The screen flickered, damaged from its dunking, but still responsive enough for her to tap out. "Do it now." From his position on higher ground near the parking lot, Quentin didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, triggering the release of hundreds of files to media outlets, law enforcement agencies, and social platforms across 3 states. The evidence they'd discovered on that tiny memory card was about to blow Liam Brooks's corrupt empire wide open. "It's done," Quentin called down to the boat, his voice carrying over the crackle of flames still consuming the marina's main dock. "Everything's going live right now." As if to confirm his words, phones began chiming and buzzing all around them. Even some of Liam's own men were pulling out their devices, their faces illuminated by screens showing thumbnail images of their boss's crimes. Tamsin watched as Liam Brooks realized what was happening. His usual mask of cold control cracked. He grabbed one of his handler's phones, his face turning ashen as he scrolled through the incoming notifications. Video after video, document after document, all the evidence of his operation's brutal training methods, staged attacks, and corrupt dealings with local law enforcement was spreading like wildfire across social media. "The timestamps," she heard him growl. "The payments, everything." Deputy Sutter's reaction was even more dramatic. The man who had spent years helping to cover up Liam's crimes stumbled backward, his badge catching the firelight as his hand went to his chest. The videos clearly showed him accepting bribes, coordinating cover-ups, and threatening witnesses. His career was over, and he knew it. "You can't," Sutter shouted across the water, his voice cracking. "You don't understand what you've done." But understanding was spreading rapidly through the gathering crowd of marina visitors and emergency responders. People who had come to help with the fire were now standing still, transfixed by their phones as the truth about Brooks' security kennels unfolded before them. Hollis, still wrapped in blankets and pressed against Duke's protective bulk, watched it all with wide eyes. "They can't hurt any more dogs now, can they?" he asked softly. Rowan squeezed his son's shoulder. "No, buddy. Not anymore." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night, but these weren't the familiar wails of local patrol cars. These were different. State police cruisers and tactical vehicles, their distinctive tones growing louder by the second. "That'll be Captain Reynolds and the task force," Quentin called down, satisfaction evident in his voice. "I've been feeding them information for weeks. They were just waiting for concrete evidence before moving in." Tamsin saw Liam's head snap up at those words. For the first time since she'd met him, real fear showed in his eyes. He barked orders at his men, but it was too late. The first state police vehicles were already blocking the marina's entrance, their lights painting the smoke-filled air in red and blue. Duke stood at attention in the boat, his posture alert but calm. The German Shepherd seemed to understand that these new arrivals weren't threats. If anything, his tail gave a slight wag as uniformed officers began to spread out across the property. Phones continued pinging throughout the growing crowd. The evidence was spreading exponentially now, being shared and reshared across platforms. Local news stations were breaking into regular programming. Tamsin could hear the shocked murmurs as people recognized faces in the videos. Prominent local figures who had helped maintain Liam's facade of legitimacy. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, State Police Special Investigations," a clear voice called out through a bullhorn. "Liam Brooks, Deputy Leonard Sutter, you are both under arrest. Remain where you are with your hands visible." Tamsin watched as Liam's shoulders slumped in defeat. His carefully constructed world of intimidation and control was crumbling in real time. All around him, his handlers were already backing away, trying to distance themselves from their boss's downfall. Deputy Sutter made one last desperate move, reaching for his service weapon. But before he could draw it, Duke let out a single warning bark that froze him in place. The deputy's hand fell away from his holster as state officers converged on his position. From their vantage point on the boat, now safely moored at a distant dock, Tamsin and the others watched as handcuffs were placed on both Liam and Sutter. The two men who had terrorized so many were led away under the watchful eyes of state authorities. "Look," Hollis said softly, holding up his own phone. Someone had shared an old training video, one showing Duke refusing to attack a child during one of Liam's demonstrations. The dog in the video took a beating for his disobedience, but never wavered from his protective instincts. Tamsin felt tears well up as she watched present-day Duke press closer to Hollis, as if promising to always keep him safe. The dog's journey from abuse to love, from weapon to protector, was now part of the evidence spreading across the internet. His story would help ensure that Liam's operation could never rebuild. Emergency medical technicians approached their boat, concerned about Hollis's dunking in the cold water. But they found him warm and secure between his father and his dog, showing no ill effects from the ordeal. Duke submitted to their examination of Hollis with watchful tolerance, demonstrating the perfect balance of protection and restraint that made him such a remarkable service animal. "Ms. Ward," one of the state officers approached the dock. "We'll need statements from all of you, but it can wait until tomorrow. Captain Reynolds wants you to know that your evidence files have already been downloaded by 15 different law enforcement agencies. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle." Tamsin nodded, relief flooding through her tired body. She watched as more police vehicles arrived, their lights reflecting off the settling smoke from the dying fire. The truth was out, spreading faster than any attempt to contain it could manage. Justice, so long denied, was finally taking hold. Around them, the night continued to fill with the sounds of incoming messages as the evidence spread further. Each ping represented another person learning the truth about Liam Brooks and his operation. Each share and repost helped ensure that no amount of money or influence could sweep this under the rug. Duke's head rested on Hollis's lap, his eyes half closed but still alert. He had completed his mission, not just to protect this one boy, but to help bring down the entire system of cruelty that had tried to break his spirit. In doing so, he had transformed from victim to hero, from evidence to justice. The state police began setting up a command post, their efficient movements illuminated by portable floodlights. Investigators were already documenting the scene, photographing the fire damage and collecting statements from witnesses. The professional response was a stark contrast to the corrupt local law enforcement that had protected Liam for so long. Tamsin saw Quentin talking with several reporters who had begun arriving at the scene. He was in his element, making sure the story would be told accurately and completely. His years of investigating local corruption had finally paid off in the most dramatic way possible. The night air was still thick with smoke, but a fresh breeze was beginning to clear it away. Like the truth itself, clean air was replacing the toxic clouds that had hidden so much for so long. Change was coming to their small town, sparked by one dog's unbreakable spirit and one boy's pure heart. Through the chaos of sirens and shouts, Liam Brooks made his desperate move. He shoved past one of his handlers and sprinted toward the far end of the dock, his boots pounding against the wet planks. The flames from the earlier explosion still cast dancing shadows across the water, making his figure appear to flicker as he ran. But Duke was faster. The German Shepherd launched from Hollis's side, a blur of black and tan fur cutting through the smoke-filled air. His powerful legs ate up the distance between him and his former tormentor in seconds. Liam's escape route ended at a massive wooden piling, the dock's corner post looming before him like a final judgment. Duke cornered him there, hackles raised and teeth bared in a silent snarl. The dog's amber eyes locked onto Liam's face, unwavering and intense. Despite years of abuse at this man's hands, despite being trained to attack on command, Duke didn't lunge. He held his ground, a living barrier between Liam and freedom. Liam pressed his back against the piling, his usual arrogance crumbling as he faced the dog he'd tried so hard to break. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice shaking. "Easy now." Duke's only response was a low growl that seemed to rise from deep in his chest. His scarred body tensed, ready to spring if Liam made another move, but showing remarkable restraint. This wasn't the mindless attack dog Liam had tried to create. This was a protector choosing justice over vengeance. State police agents swarmed the dock, their boots thundering against the wooden planks. Their flashlight beams cut through the evening gloom, highlighting Duke's disciplined stance and Liam's defeated posture. "Down on your knees," an agent commanded. "Hands where we can see them." Liam slowly sank to his knees, never taking his eyes off Duke. The dog maintained his position until two agents secured Liam's wrists with handcuffs. Only then did Duke's posture relax slightly, though he remained vigilant. Across the dock, Deputy Sutter was receiving similar treatment. The corrupt lawman's badge was removed from his uniform as agents recited his rights. His weathered face had gone pale, all his usual swagger replaced by the shocked expression of someone watching their world collapse. "You don't understand," Sutter was saying, his voice taking on a pleading edge. "This town needs order. We kept things running smooth." "Save it for your attorney," one of the agents cut him off, leading him toward a waiting patrol car. Near the boat, where the confrontation had begun, Rowan Crane's legs finally gave out. He sank to his knees on the dock, his body shaking with relief and exhaustion. The night's terror, the fire, the fear for his son, It all caught up with him at once. Tears streaked through the smoke smudges on his face. Tamsin held Hollis securely in her arms, both of them still damp from their earlier plunge into the water. The boy's breathing had steadied, though his clothes were singed, and his face showed the strain of the ordeal. Yet there was triumph in his eyes as he watched Duke pad back toward them. Mission accomplished. "That's my good boy," Hollis whispered as Duke reached them. The dog pressed his nose gently against the boy's hand before settling into a protective position beside them. His own body bore the marks of the night's battle, singed fur along his flank, where he'd braved the flames, water still dripping from his coat from the rescue dive. The cost of victory was written clearly on all their faces. Tamsin's usual composed expression was stripped raw with emotion, her professional distance broken down by everything they'd endured together. Rowan's shoulders slumped with released tension, years seeming to age him in these few hours. Even Duke's noble bearing showed signs of wear, his muscles trembling slightly from exertion and stress. But they had won. As Liam and Sutter were led away in handcuffs, the corrupt system they'd built began crumbling. Other officers were already collecting evidence from the scene, documenting the explosion site, photographing tire tracks, gathering witness statements. The truth would have its day in court. Duke's restraint in that final confrontation spoke volumes. Where Liam had tried to create a weapon, he had instead forged something stronger, a guardian whose moral compass pointed true, even in the face of justified revenge. The dog's choice to corner rather than attack, to protect rather than harm, stood as powerful testimony against everything Liam had represented. Emergency medical technicians approached cautiously, respectful of Duke's protective stance. They checked Hollis first, wrapping him in a warm blanket and examining him for injuries. Duke allowed their approach, but watched every movement with careful attention, still taking his role as guardian seriously. The night air was heavy with smoke and sea spray, but a clean breeze was beginning to blow in from the water. It carried away the acrid smell of burning wood and plastic, seeming to cleanse the scene of its recent violence. Red and blue emergency lights continued to flash across the water, but their urgency had diminished. The crisis had passed. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen counter as Rowan Crane unfolded the newspaper, his coffee forgotten beside him. There, spread across the front page of the New York Times, was the story that had changed everything. Criminal dog training operation exposed, justice unleashed. The article detailed the full scope of Liam Brooks's operation: 37 counts of animal cruelty, 15 charges of conspiracy, and 8 indictments for corruption. Deputy Sutter faced his own stack of charges, his badge permanently surrendered. The investigation had expanded to 3 neighboring counties, exposing similar operations and triggering a nationwide review of private security kennels. But what caught Rowan's eye wasn't the litany of charges. It was the smaller photograph beneath the headline. Duke lay curled protectively around Hollis's wheelchair during his service dog certification test, both of them radiating a calm confidence that seemed worlds away from those terrifying nights at the marina. "Dad, look what came!" Hollis's voice rang through the house, full of excitement. The sound of his wheelchair hummed down the hallway, Duke padding faithfully beside him. In Hollis's lap sat a thick envelope bearing an official seal. Rowan set down his paper and smiled. "Well, open it up, buddy." Hollis tore into the envelope with trembling fingers, Duke's head resting supportively on his knee. The boy's face lit up as he pulled out a formal certificate with gold embossing. "Duke passed. He's officially certified." The certification process had been rigorous, weeks of training, evaluations, and demonstrations. But Duke had excelled at every test, showing an almost supernatural awareness of Hollis's needs. The evaluators had been amazed by their natural bond, commenting that some partnerships take years to develop what these two achieved in months. "That calls for a celebration," Rowan declared, reaching for his phone. "Let me text Tamsin. Maybe she can bring those special treats Duke loves." At the mention of treats, Duke's ears perked up, and his tail began a hopeful wag. The dog's physical transformation over the past weeks had been remarkable. His coat now gleamed with health. The burn marks from the shed fire had healed into barely visible scars, and his eyes held a steady peace that spoke of absolute trust in his new family. That evening, Tamsin arrived carrying not only dog treats, but also a small cake decorated with paw prints. "Couldn't let our star graduate go unrecognized," she said, setting everything on the kitchen counter. Her smile carried the warmth of someone who had watched a miracle unfold. As they shared cake and stories, Hollis dozed in his wheelchair, the day's excitement catching up with him. Duke maintained his usual position beside the chair, but his vigilance now had a gentler quality, more protector than guardian. "He's sleeping through the night now," Rowan mentioned quietly to Tamsin. "No more nightmares, no more jumping at shadows." Tamsin nodded, understanding the weight of that simple statement. The weeks following the Marina incident had been challenging, processing trauma, giving statements, dealing with media attention. But through it all, Duke had been their anchor, his steady presence a reminder that they were safe. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for the quiet moment Rowan and Tamsin had planned. While Hollis's aunt watched him and Duke at home, they drove to the river, finding a peaceful spot where the water curved gently around a sandy bank. They sat in comfortable silence, watching early sunlight dance on the water. It was hard to believe this was the same world that had seemed so threatening just weeks ago. "I never properly thanked you," Rowan said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "For believing us, for fighting alongside us, for everything." Tamsin's hand found his, a gesture as natural as breathing. "Some things are worth fighting for," she replied simply. The morning air carried the clean scent of pine and possibility. Here, by the quietly flowing river, they could feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished, not just exposing corruption, but helping to heal a community's wounds. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. Quentin's familiar sedan pulled up, and the journalist emerged with a grin and an oversized bag of tennis balls. "Thought I'd find you here," he called out, joining them by the water. "Have you seen the latest numbers? The story's gone absolutely viral. People can't get enough of Duke's journey from abuse to heroism." He pulled out his tablet, showing them social media streams filled with Duke's photo and hashtags about rescue dogs and second chances. Animal shelters across the country reported increased adoption rates, with German Shepherds in particular finding new homes. "It's bigger than just our town now," Quentin continued excitedly. "People are demanding better oversight of security dog training. 3 states have already introduced new legislation. They're calling it the Duke effect." Rowan shook his head, still amazed by how far their story had reached. "Duke would probably trade all that fame for one more tennis ball." Quentin laughed and tossed him the bag. "Then it's a good thing I came prepared." Later that afternoon, they returned home to find Hollis and Duke in the backyard, the boy reading aloud from his favorite book, while the dog lounged contentedly in the sun. The scene was so ordinary, so peaceful, that it brought tears to Rowan's eyes. This was the real miracle, not the national headlines or the viral videos, but these quiet moments of healing and connection. Duke had entered their lives as a wounded warrior and emerged as family, helping them rebuild something stronger than what was, broken. The German Shepherd lifted his head as they approached, offering a gentle woof of greeting. His amber eyes held complete contentment, reflecting the peace that had finally settled over their home. Hollis looked up from his book, smiling. "Duke says it's time for his afternoon walk. Want to come?" "Wouldn't miss it," Rowan replied, helping Tamsin gather Duke's service vest and leash. As they set out down their familiar neighborhood route, Rowan realized that their story hadn't really ended at the marina that night. Instead, something new had begun, a chapter filled with healing, hope, and the kind of love that transforms lives. Duke walked proudly beside Hollis's wheelchair, his stride matching the boy's pace perfectly. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism, Rowan reflected, weren't in dramatic rescues or explosive confrontations, but in these daily moments of faithful love. The afternoon sun warmed their backs as they walked, four souls bound together by courage and circumstance, now moving forward as family. The air around them held no trace of fear, no echo of past dangers. Only the sweet, simple peace that comes with knowing you're exactly where you belong. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.